I'm joined now by Lord Ashbourne, formerly Charlie Gibson. He's an analyst at Edison, and he's written a report on Metals One, the company with significant portfolio of assets in Scandinavia. So, Charlie, tell us what your note says and what your general view of the company is.
So I think we both know Metals One, don't we? It has these assets. It has Rana in Norway. They're both exploration assets. They're both looking essentially for nickel. They got Rana in Norway. They farmed that out, and their major, I suppose, focus at the moment is the Black Schist project, which is at Sotkamo. Roughly, if you threw a dart and hit the middle of Finland, that's roughly where it is. The more important thing probably about the Black Schist project is it essentially surrounds an existing mine. That existing mine is operated by Terrafarme, used to be Talvivara. They're operating, they make they produce nickel sulfate actually, and the whole thrust of this is to get sort of low carbon minerals, metals, chemicals into the European, essentially the car industry. So they're producing things like nickel sulfate for batteries. This is as distinct from most nickel in the world, which goes into stainless steel and comes out of the likes of China and Indonesia and the Far East. So that's the entire thrust of Terrafarme's mine. And because Terrafarme are essentially doing exactly the same thing as Metals One want to do in exactly the same place, there's a sort of read across saying, well, Terrafarme are doing this. They make about 500 million euros a year, something like that, in revenue. And so the opportunity should be there for Metals One to do exactly the same thing. They've got, I think, what on global terms would be, regarded as a small resource at the moment, about 57 million tons. They could have a lot more. Yeah, as they describe it, if you want more resource, all you need to do is keep drilling, along strike, down dip, whatever the existing ore body, and you find more of it. So there's upside potential. So first of all, we got the resource, which is something we can value. And then second of all, the question is, what are the upside prospects on that?
So, talk about the resource then. What are its characteristics? Is this a deep? Is it deep? Is it broad? Is it easy to mine? How much do we know about it?
I mean, I think it would be very easy to mine. The Terrafarme don't have any problem mining theirs. It would be mined in a series of shallow pits, so it would be about 200 meters deep. If you were digging a hole in the sand on the beach, that sounds like a lot. But if you're a mining company with, lots of big pieces of metal equipment, 200 meters is not a deep pit at all. So yes, I think the most important thing is, it's continuous. And that makes mining very easy. If you have a discontinuous ore body, it makes it very difficult, and you get dilution. You have to sort of reconfigure your mining all the time. But if it's continuous, you can mine something, and essentially, could you mine this almost like a coal seam? Yes, you probably could. So the mining of it is I don't think, is going to be a problem.
And is it possible to put any kind of valuation on it at this stage?
Well, I think it is from the resource, yes. Now, I mean, I think that nickel should be worth about $24-25 a ton in the ground. Which is putting a percentage on the price of 0.15% of the price of nickel as it is at the moment. And this goes back to a report I wrote some years ago. What is Metals One's current rating, if you want to look at it in that way? And it's about $14.17 in the ground. So it's trading at a fairly substantial discount. It's a sort of 40-ish% discount. So we can say for the nickel they have in the ground, they're looking pretty cheap. And that is, what I suppose one possibility might be, because at the moment, that resource is fairly small. I think it can support a mine, but it is fairly small. The other surprise though is in Finland. And Finland, if you're in Europe, it's probably the best place to mine in Europe. Finland, I don't want to take this too far, but it is sort of Canada to, if you like, to Europe. In the way that Canada is to North America, Finland is a sort of Canada to Europe in terms of mining. It's Europe's largest mining destination, and a lot of mining happens there. It's a good destination. So the fact that you've got nickel in Finland arguably it should carry a premium valuation rather than a discounted valuation. That $24.41 that I quoted to you, that's a sort of global average. So you might say, well, maybe it should be a bit more in Finland. So that's, that is one way of approaching the valuation, and you can say it's cheap on that, per ton of nickel in the ground, you can say it's cheap. The other way is just simply to look at the book value of the company. Book value of the company at the end of last year, 2023, according to their accounts, 4.24 pence per share. The shares are obviously trading at a lot, a big discount to that. I've done some sort of a bit of financial forecasting. The book value will come down, but it'll come down to about 2.5 pence per share for the end of this year. And so, you're looking at a very substantial sort of 80% discount that the shares are sitting at to that book value. So it's a bit like someone's got a house that's worth £100,000 and they're saying, I'll sell, half of it to you for £20,000, something like that. You can see it's cheap again on that basis compared to the amount of money that's been put in and the price at which that money has been put in. You're buying in cheaply. And the other, we always, when we look at these projects, you always look at the NPV of the cash flow you might get out of mining nickel. Now, we don't have a mining schedule and a study yet on which to do that calculation and get an NPV and then say, how's the share price comparing to that NPV? What we can do, though, is we can back calculate and say, there is a consultancy, Wardell Armstrong, who are very well known in this country, well, indeed globally, and they're currently doing a PEA on the project. And what I've sort of back calculated is say, well, if you look at the share price at the moment, what's it discounting? If it was a globally average project, so not really in Finland at all, but somewhere else, if it's as a globally average project, if it came out with an NPV of $12 million or better, you would expect the share price to go up. So the share price on that basis is discounting an NPV of $12 million. And if we say, all right, it should have a premium valuation because it's in Finland, what is the share price discounting? And it's discounting an NPV of 4.1 million. So, these are not very demanding NPVs. And if you've got an NPV, of that order of magnitude or higher, I would expect the share price to go up in response to that. So those are kind of the three ways that I've looked at it, if you like. There's the book value, there's nickel in the ground, and then there's back calculating what NPV do we want. And, NPVs are usually measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a small project. So, I don't think it's hundreds of millions or billions. In fact, I'm pretty sure it isn't. But it's discounting fairly low numbers. So I think those are the three bases on which I've looked at Metals One so far and why I've come up with the conclusion that I have done.
Plenty of food for thought there. What about talking about valuation? Do you put any valuation on Rana as well, the joint venture with Kingsrose?
Yeah, difficult one, but possible. Again, early stage. What have we got? Lots of ground in Norway, very close to Narvik. Again, looking for nickel. Now, Metals One have farmed this out to an Australian company called Kingsrose. And Kingsrose, you might, if you haven't heard of them, you might think they're a typical Australian junior. They're not actually, because they actually do already have an exploration alliance with BHP, which tells you something about how BHP sees Kingsrose. And BHP are basically funding a lot of investment in Kingsrose in Scandinavia or in the Nordic region. Now, actually, Rana is not in that because Kingsrose have kept it out. But it tells you the quality of Kingsrose as a company. Now, so Kingsrose are doing the exploration. They're putting in boreholes. They're hitting nickel. At the moment, they're farming in. So they're spending money and getting an ever larger proportion of the project. Metals One are sitting back and allowing themselves to be diluted. But if you make the sort of equation between investment made and value, what you can do is you can say, well, at the moment, Metals One have 39% of something that should be worth at least 3 million Australian dollars. Excuse me. Now, that works out at 0.18p per Metals One share. It's not much, but it's quite a lot compared to their share price of, 0.5 or so. It's about a third of it.
Mm.
If King's Rows go all the way, then Metals One would have 15% of something worth 15 million Australian dollars, because that's the investment that would have been made by King's Rows in the deposit, and that would be worth 0.35 pence per Metals One share. So over half the current share price, and that's not their lead project. So do we know where this is going? Well, it's certainly hitting nickel. If they come up with a nickel resource, then we can sort of put the valuation on a different basis, and sometime further out maybe there's a project. But all the indications are that the Rana project, if it becomes a project, could be much bigger than the Black Schist project in Finland, and Metals One themselves sort of liken it to potentially it could be another Voisey's Bay. There's quite a lot more exploration that needs to, that's just a bit like saying it could be another Witwatersrand in gold. There's quite a lot of work to do between now and then to get it there, but that's the sort of that's where the target is, if you like. So that's what they're aiming at. So it could be something very, very significant. It's a bit further down the track in terms of time, but it could be something very large for them.
Very interesting. And Voisey's Bay being one of the biggest nickel deposits ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think is going to happen next then? I mean, we talked about the valuation from all sorts of different directions, and it looks very attractive. But obviously, Metals One have got to sort of deliver on some of this. How do you think that's going to unfold?
So I think next thing is going to be a PEA, which it is currently underway, and I think we're looking at getting a result out of that this quarter, and then assuming that that's positive, then they make one of the other interesting aspects of Metals One is they do have access to some sort of non-dilutive funding. With mining juniors, there's always this game of they need to raise more money, and they issue shares, and existing shareholders tend to get diluted. Now, I'm not saying they won't issue shares. There are going to be various points in the future where they are going to do that, but they also have access to non-dilutive funding via the EU is very, very keen to try and catalyze a domestic sort of battery chemicals markets, and there are various grants available. There's a very large sort of 500 million euro fund which has been set up to help try and sort of seed the industry, and that's been set up. That's raised money. They may raise more money, and they are making investments. At the moment, there's a bit of a dearth of investments for them to make. There aren't that many projects and opportunities in Europe, so it's one of the areas that they could get non-dilutive funding. So Metals One, after the PEA, the preliminary economic assessment, and that's a precursor. You do a PEA, it's sometimes called a scoping study, then you do a pre-feasibility, then you do a feasibility. But they're doing the PEA this effectively before the year end, and after that they'll make an application for strategic project status under the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act, and once that's done, that makes them eligible then for this sort of non-dilutive funding. So I think that's what's next on the horizon in terms of milestones. All the while, we're probably going to be getting results out from King's Rows and Rana as well. So we'll see those two things operating in parallel.
Right, much to look forward to then. So final question, Charlie. The junior mining market has been depressed for some time, and commodity prices haven't really been helping. We talked a lot about nickel. I believe Metals One also has some copper and some other metals.
Yeah.
Do you sort of see any signs of those dynamics turning a corner, both in terms of uplifting commodities price and perhaps a sort of recovery in sentiment to the junior mining markets overall?
I think there are two things there. First of all, just to clear up, yes, I've been talking about nickel when I've talked about Metals One, but all of this nickel comes in conjunction with copper, with zinc, and with cobalt. I just say nickel because that's the lead. That's the most valuable metal in the complex, but it does have those other three as well. And to be honest, it probably has more besides. There's also graphite in those deposits. So when I say nickel, you could read all of those three into it as well. Base metals, they tend to all dance to the same tune a little bit, and that is the tune of global economic growth. And we're in a slightly confused, I think it would be fair to say, position as far as, global growth is concerned. There's what's going, and China, of course, is a huge consumer of all of these metals. So there's what's going on with China. There's what's going on in the world. Whatever the situation at the moment, at some point, the world is going to return to growth. Now, do I know when that is? Can I throw a pin at a dartboard and, or dart at a dartboard and maybe hit it? Maybe, but it will return at some point. Whether it's a month, a week, a year, whatever, it will return. And when it does, I expect base metals prices in particular to start to pick up. The other thing, which is relevant, it's more relevant now in gold, but is effectively what is the value of the dollar, because we measure all of these things in dollars, and we tend to think of the value of the dollar as constant and the value of metals as moving. You could think of the value of metals as constant and the value of the dollar as moving. There's no real way of seeing the dollar becoming stronger very easily, or indeed fiat currencies, paper currencies in general, becoming more valuable over time. So if they become less valuable, then you would expect to see the metals price go up, because almost all governments at the moment are adopting or pursuing relatively accommodative economic monetary policies, and that's why you can assume the value. That is catalyzing gold at the moment. It may or may not catalyze to some extent base metals, but when the economic cycle turns and global growth takes off, what you'll probably get is a sort of a geared effect, where you'll see base metals will move up because because there'll be more demand, and the supply demand equation will push their prices up. But you'll also see the market catching up to hang on, but all these paper currencies are losing value as well. So you'll probably get a sort of, a double whammy, as they say, of upward effect on those metals prices. So they're slightly out of kilter with gold at the moment. Over my career, I've seen copper go from $2,000 a ton or $1 a pound, and everyone thought it would stay there in the early 2000s, to close to $5 a pound, certainly well into the $4 a pound now. They have actually had a tremendous run. If you compare that with something like the FTSE 100 index, which has gone from 7,000 to 8,000 over the same period, that multiplied by 4 is, it's not far off being where the Dow Jones has got to. So, they have had a tremendous run. Can they again? Yeah, they absolutely will at some point in the future. I'm just not quite sure when that is.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for Metals One's sake that it will be sooner rather than later. It was really good talking to you today, Charlie. Thanks so much for all your insights.
My pleasure.